In the high ridges of Colorado's Elk Mountains, winter doesn't end. It only learns to whisper. That morning, the silence was too perfect. Not a single crow, not a gust of wind, not even the crack of melting ice, just stillness. Miles from any road, in a battered off-grid cabin, clinging to the edge of a frozen lake, lived a man named Elias Ward, 52, former firefighter, widowed, and lately, more shadow than man. He hadn't spoken to another human face to face in nearly 11 months. He preferred it that way. People brought noise. Grief needed silence. But that morning, the silence was broken. It started as a single sound, so faint he thought it was memory playing tricks on him. A short, stuttering cry, almost like a kitten. Then again, sharper, real. He stepped outside. Instinct moving faster than thought. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he scanned the frost-covered slope behind the cabin. And there, just beneath the scorched base of a pine tree, burned last summer by a lightning fire, was something moving, small, shivering, alive. Elias dropped to his knees and brushed the snow away. What he uncovered made his breath catch in his throat. A bobcat kitten, not more than a few weeks old. Spotted fur, wide, frantic eyes. It was tangled in branches. Its leg awkwardly pinned. Blood had frozen on its side. "Easy now," he whispered, as if the wild would understand gentleness. The kitten hissed weakly, then collapsed. He scooted up into his coat, pressing it against the thermal heat of his chest. But as he turned back toward the cabin, he heard it again, not the same cry. This one was lower, slower, a rasping breath. He turned. Just 10 feet away, half buried beneath black and pine needles, was another cub, bigger, golden brown coat, eyes shut tight. Elias blinked. No way, it wasn't a bobcat. It was a mountain lion cub. A puma, alone, dying, and just like the bobcat, crying for something that would never return. Elias had fought flames, carried grown men through smoke. But nothing in his life had prepared him for what he did next. He knelt, took off his gloves, and with hands already trembling, reached for the second heartbeat. The cabin wasn't made for guests, let alone to have frozen wild animals, but Elias didn't hesitate. He kicked the door open with his shoulder, still cradling the bobcat in his coat. The puma cub, limp and damp in his other arm, gave a faint twitch as the warmth hit them. He laid them both near the wood stove, on an old wool blanket. The room filled with steam as snow melted from their fur. He kept the fire burning high, checking every few minutes with hands more used to tools than tenderness. The bobcat stirred first, ears flicking, body twitching in sleep. The puma didn't move. Elias frowned. He touched its side. No heat, barely a breath. He grabbed a towel and began rubbing the cub's ribs, slow at first, then harder. Still nothing. "Come on, kid," he muttered, voice cracking. "Don't quit now." He didn't notice the tears until they hit the cub's fur. He didn't notice his own breathing speeding up, his hands shaking, his body remembering what it meant to feel panic. Then it happened, a cough, a weak, raspy sound, followed by a shallow gasp. The cub's paw twitched, its eyes fluttered. Elias sat back on his heels, closed his eyes. "You're not going anywhere," he whispered. "Not today." By midnight, both cubs were breathing evenly. He set up a crate with blankets and a soft cushion. He boiled water for formula, using the same emergency milk replacer he had once stocked for raccoons. The bobcat refused at first, then latched on with ferocity. The puma was slower, shakier, but it drank. He didn't name them that night. He wasn't ready. But he stayed by their side until the sun returned. They slept curled together, the bobcat's head tucked under the puma's chin, fur tangled, breath cinched. And for the first time in years, Elias didn't wake up to silence. He woke up to life. The days that followed fell into a quiet rhythm, feeding, cleaning, watching, hoping. The bobcat was recovering fast. His leg, once stiff and bruised, now flexed with each clumsy step. He explored the cabin like he owned it, climbing onto furniture and knocking over every cup within reach. Elias patched up a corner of the room just for him, but it didn't matter. The kitten preferred chaos. The puma, though, was different. She was gentler, slower, still unsure if the world was safe. She often hid beneath the bed, eyes wide, flinching at every creak in the floorboards. But when Elias lay down beside her and spoke softly, she didn't run. He spent hours reading aloud from an old book of Jack London stories. Not because he believed the cubs understood, but because the sound of his own voice, steady and warm, made the cabin feel less like a tomb. On the 7th day, something shifted. The puma emerged from under the bed without being coaxed. She padded across the floor and curled beside the bobcat, resting her head on his back. Elias watched them from the armchair, heart tight in his chest. "You two need names," he whispered. He looked at the bobcat, who was now gnawing aggressively on the leg of a chair. You're wildfire, all teeth and trouble." "Let's go with Ash." The kitten paused, blinked at him, then bit the chair again. He turned to the puma. She was watching him. Not scared now, just curious. "And you," he said gently, "you're quieter. Like moonlight on snow." He paused, searching. "Solana. That fits you." She blinked once, slowly. Names change things. Now when he fed them, he called them. When they cried, he whispered comfort, using their names. When he dreamed of Ash curled in a ball on his chest, and Solana pressed against the curve of his back. And for the first time in 5 long years, Elias Ward began to feel like someone who belonged somewhere. The snow had begun to melt, not fast, not enough to call it spring. But the icicles no longer reached the ground, and the lake's edge had turned from glass to slush. Ash was thriving. He no longer limped, and had claimed the windowsill as his throne, swatting at passing birds with the arrogance of a king. Solana moved like fog. She had grown stronger, sleeker. Every day, she followed Elias a little farther when he stepped outside. Never too close, never too far behind. He talked to them constantly now. Named the trees, sang while chopping wood. Laughed at his own jokes. They listened. They were enough. But something else was listening too. It started with the scent. Elias noticed it one morning while refilling the water bucket outside. A sharp musk in the air. Not ash, not animal waste. Something wild and unfamiliar. The next day, he found tracks, large, deeper than Ash's, wider than Solana's, not bear, not cougar. Wolves, maybe. He stared at them for a long time, heart tapping a different rhythm. He didn't tell Ash or Solana, of course, but that night, he bolted the door. The next sound came 3 days later. It was dusk. Elias had just lit the lantern when Solana stopped mid-step. Her body went stiff, her ears pointed back. Ash let out a low, uncertain growl. And then Elias heard it, a branch cracking. A single footstep on wet ground, silence, then another. Elias moved to the window. The forest beyond the cabin was darkening, swallowing detail. But he saw it, just for a second, a figure. Human, still, watching. Elias didn't breathe. Then the shape turned and disappeared into the trees. The figure returned at dawn. Elias hadn't slept. He sat near the stove, shotgun untouched beside the door. Not fear, just readiness. When the knock came, it was softer than expected. 3 short taps, then silence. He opened the door slowly. A woman stood there, wrapped in a thick green parka, her hood pulled low. Mid-30s, maybe, tall, focused, her boots were caked in mud and snow. "M.R. Ward." Elias said nothing. "I'm Dr. Mara Kessler. Wildlife Conservation Services." Still nothing. She reached into her coat, slowly, and pulled out a worn badge. "We received an anonymous report. Someone spotted a puma cub, possibly a bobcat too, near this cabin. Behind him, Ash growled low from under the table. Solana stood near the hallway, silent but watching. Moraz's eyes flicked toward the sound. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to confirm the report. Elias stepped outside, closing the door behind him. They were dying. I didn't go looking for them. I believe you, she said, calmly. But it's still illegal to keep wild animals past the emergency phase, especially a cougar. They wouldn't be alive if I hadn't taken them in. Mara nodded, her face unreadable. I'm not here to take them, not yet. I'm just here to assess, report, decide what comes next. Elias looked at the trees, his jaw tight. They're not ready to be released. I'm not saying they are, she replied, then paused. But the law doesn't always care about ready. She handed him a folded document. I'll be back in 1 month. As she turned to leave, she hesitated. What are their names? Elias blinked. Ash and Solana. She smiled faintly. Beautiful. Let's hope the system agrees. And just like that, she was gone. Elias stood at the door, the paper heavy in his hand. Inside, 2 lives waited for him, and outside, the countdown had already begun. The cabin felt colder after she left. Elias tried to pretend nothing had changed, but it had. The paper sat on the table like a warning bell, echoing in his mind every time he glanced at it. Ash noticed first. Elias stopped laughing, stopped reading aloud. He fed them with quiet hands and walked away without a word. Solana began pacing more. She would sit by the window 4 hours, eyes locked on the woods, ears twitching at every sound. Ash grew restless. He knocked over a lamp, tore at the blanket, whined at the door. They didn't understand. Elias knew that, but he didn't know how to protect them and prepare them at the same time. He started feeding them outside, first near the cabin, then a few steps farther each day. Solana hesitated. Ash refused. The 3rd morning, he placed the bowls by the tree line. Neither of them moved. They just stared at him through the window. When night fell, they still hadn't eaten. He caved, brought the bowls inside. Ash pounced. Solana followed. Elias sat on the floor and watched them eat. Something inside him cracked. This is cruel, he whispered. I'm making them suffer so someone else can feel better about a rule. Ash finished and climbed into his lap, without hesitation. Elias didn't stop him. Solana moved closer, then closer still, and lay beside him. Herfa brushed his arm. He didn't push them away. Not this time. I don't know how to let you go, he said, barely audible. But they're going to make me try. Ash licked his hand. Solana let out a sound so soft it felt like breath. And the silence that had once been his comfort now sounded a lot like heartbreak. The calendar on the wall hadn't meant anything for years. Now, Elias stared at it every morning. He had circled the date in red. August 14th. There was a smear of ash over it. Fitting. 1 week left. He stopped sleeping properly. He would doze for an hour or 2, then wake in a panic, sometimes to Solana pacing, sometimes to Ash whining softly in his sleep. The nights were worst. He kept the windows closed, the doors locked, the lights dimmed, but the thoughts crept in anyway. What if they didn't let him keep them? What if Solana resisted release? What if Ash refused to leave? What if they tranquilized them? He tried to imagine them alone out there, without shelter, without him. He couldn't. They weren't wild anymore. Not fully. They didn't know how to hunt properly. They had no territory, no pack, no mother. He was their world, and they were his. On the 3rd day before the deadline, he found Ash curled up inside his work boots. Solana was asleep under the kitchen table, her body pressed close to the floor, as if trying to disappear. Elias sat down beside her, placed his hand near her shoulder. I don't know how to protect you from this. She didn't move away. He rose, went to the back room, and opened an old crate. Inside was his emergency kit. Wrapped in thick canvas, he unrolled it carefully. Inside were two small GPS trackers. He had bought them years ago, for walls he never ended up rehabilitating. That night, as Ash lay beside the fire and Solana sat near the door, Elias placed the collars gently in his lap. "If I have to let you go," he whispered, "I'm going to make damn sure I can find you again." Solana looked at him, her blue eyes steady. Then she lowered her head and lay down at his feet. Ash yawned and rolled over, exposing his belly, and outside, the tree stood still, waiting. August 14th came like a funeral, not in noise, but in weight. Elias woke up before the sun. He didn't move for a long time, just stared at the ceiling and listened to the silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that comes before something breaks. Ash was already awake, curled at the foot of the bed, eyes wide and unblinking. Solana stood near the back door, her body rigid, tail low. They knew. He fed them like it was any other morning, but they didn't eat. At 9:07 a.m., a car approached, tires crunching slowly over gravel. Elias stood on the porch, heart pounding in his throat. The SUV stopped just outside the fence drive. Kessler stepped out, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the property with the cool calm of someone who didn't want to be the villain, but had a job to do. "Morning," she said. Elias nodded. "They're inside." She walked up the steps with quiet footsteps. "I brought sedatives, just in case." The words made him flinch. "I don't want them suffering," she added. "They're not suffering," Elias said. She paused. "Then why are they so still?" He didn't answer. Inside, Solana hadn't moved. Ash stood in front of her now, as if guarding her. Their eyes locked on the door. "Doctor." Kessler took one step in. Solana growled, low, warning. Ash mirrored her. Elias held up a hand. "Let me try." He walked in slowly, got down to his knees. "Come on," he whispered. "It's time." Ash didn't budge. Solana pressed herself farther into the corner. "Please," Elias said, voice cracking. "Don't make this harder, Doctor." Kessler sighed. "We'll have to use the sedatives." And then, without warning, Solana bolted. Straight past Elias, through the open door. Ash followed, fast as lightning. Kessler stepped back, startled. Wait. But they were gone, into the woods. No hesitation, no confusion, just decision. Elias ran to the door and stood in the frame, breath frozen. "They chose," he whispered. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel abandoned. He felt understood. The silence felt different now, not heavy like grief, but hollow like a room after the music stops. Elias didn't touch the food bowls, didn't open the back door. He just moved through the cabin and the man inside someone else's home. He washed their bedding, folded the blanket Solana used to sleep on, set Ash's favorite chew toy on the windowsill, not to forget, but to remember properly. Outside, the trees stood still, windless. The lake reflected nothing. For 2 days, he barely slept. He'd jolt awake at the sound of a twig snapping or the scrape of claws against the porch, only to realize it was just memory playing tricks. He started walking at dawn, just wandering the trails behind the cabin. No goal, no leash in his hand, only questions. On the third evening, it rained, a soft, cold mist that kissed the roof and turned the firewood damp. Elias sat on the porch with a cup of untouched coffee, staring into the fog, and that's when he saw it, a paw print, clear, fresh, right at the edge of the porch steps. He stood so fast the coffee spilled, walked out barefoot, following the prints into the damp soil. 2 sets, one small and sharp, one large and wide. They disappeared into the trees. He didn't chase them, didn't call out. Just stood there, rain dripping down his face, heart thudding. They had come back, not to stay, not to be saved. Just to show him they remembered. Spring arrived before he noticed, not because of the calendar, but because the cold lost its bite and the wind began to smell like earth and green things. Elias was different. He didn't realize it at first. Just caught himself humming while chopping firewood, leaving the door open a little longer in the mornings, sleeping through the night without waking up in panic. He repainted the living room, threw away old curtains, bought flowers, not fake ones to imitate life, but real ones to invite it in. He didn't expect to see Ash or Solana again, but that didn't mean they were gone. They lived in the bite marks on the windowsill, in the scratch marks by the pantry, in the trails he still walked every morning, now with boots and a thermos instead of dread and grief. One morning, he picked up a hammer and walked to the old shed behind the cabin. It was falling apart, still smelled like smoke and mold. It had belonged to his father, a man who never spoke kindness and never believed silence could be soft. Elias stood in the doorway a long time. Then he began to tear it down, board by board, nail by nail. He kept the good pieces, burned the rest. When it was rebuilt, clean, simple, quiet, he didn't hang a sign. Instead, he built a small wooden bench and placed it just outside the new shed. He carved some paw prints into the seat. No names, no dates, just that. Some mornings he sat there. Not to wait, not to remember, just to feel close. That evening, Elias sat on the porch, a cup of tea in his hands, the sun low and golden over the trees. He didn't look over his shoulder anymore. He didn't jump at creaks in the floor. He simply existed. And somewhere out there, in the forest that raised them all, two wild hearts ran free and remembered him. If this story touched you, you're not alone. Some bonds are too deep to break, even in silence, even in distance. Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more stories where the world meets the human heart. And if you've ever loved an animal like family, this channel is for you.